Miami Book Fair. I am Raif Yassin, a volunteer room host, and we are delighted to have you here with us this afternoon. If you look out through your schedule of the event today, you will see there are many venues, author sessions running today and Sunday, which today, okay, hopefully, plus activities in Children's Alley and programs in the Swamp and the Porch and much more activities, hopefully. All right, please consider becoming a member of the Friends of the Book Fair. This is a charitable contribution will support this wonderful book fair. Friends receive multiple benefits such as preferential seating and admission to the book fair events. And this year you will be supporting your supporting the book fair is much easier. Just text book to 501501 to donate $10. You'll receive a text back asking you to confirm your donation. Just reply yes. We are also grateful to our sponsor, including the Knight Foundation, OHL Ariana, and the Bachelor Foundation, and so many more are listed on signature throughout the fair. Miami Book Fair does not end today, tomorrow. Depending on the day is delivered, Miami Book Fair event will take place throughout the year and here and all over Miami. We are grateful to be the college and the hundreds of volunteers that makes it possible. There will be a brief question and answer outside today. So when you get out, it's to the right, and the authors will be autographing books immediately after this session. Okay, now kindly silence your cell phone so there will be no interruption. That include myself as well. So anyway. So here's to introduce our special guest. We are honored today to have two high school students in the Honey Shine program mentoring our mentoring program. They will be introducing our authors. We have here Kiana Ledger and Mariah Van Putten. Please approach and introduce your authors. Thank you. We'll see you shortly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kiana Ledger. I am 16 years old, and I am a junior at the Alonzo and Tracy Morning Senior High School. I am a Honeybug in the Honey Shine Girls Mentoring Program, and I am excited to introduce to you Miss Edwidge Danticat. Edwidge Danticat was born in Haiti and came to the United States when she was 12 years old. Her books include Breathe, Eyes, Memory, the short story collection Crit Cat, and the Farming of Bones. Named one of 20 best American novelists by Grante, Danticat's awards include Pushcart Prize for Short Fiction and American Book Award. Her books have been selected for Oprah's Book Club and have been twice nominated for the National Book Award. In 2009, Danticat received a MacArthur Genius Grant. Edwidge Danticat illustrated children's books Mama's Nightingale, a story of immigration and separation, shows how every child has the power to make a difference. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Danticat to the 2015 Miami Book Fair.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mariah Van Putten. I am 16 years old, and I am a junior at Miami Northern High School. I, too, am a honeybug of the Honey Shine Mentoring Program, and it is a pleasure that I introduce you to Miss Sonia Manzano. Sonia Manzano is best known as Maria, one of the first Hispanic characters on Sesame Street, a role she delighted in for more than 20 years. She has earned 15 Emmy Awards as a member of the Sesame Street writing staff, and is the author of the pictures books No Dogs Allowed, A Box Full of Kittens, and The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano. Manzano is author of Becoming Maria, Love and Chaos in the South Bronx. When readers meet young Sonia, she is a child living amidst the squalor of a boisterous home, filled with noisy relatives and nosy neighbors. Each day, she is glued to the TV screen that bolts out the painful realities of her existence and illuminates the possibilities that lie ahead. But when the TV goes off, Sonia is taken back to real life, the cramped, colorful world of her neighborhood and an alcoholic father. It is Sonia's dream of becoming an actress that keeps her afloat among the turbulence of her life and times. Spiced with culture, heartache, and humor, this memoir paints a lasting portrait of a girl's resilience as she grows up to become an inspiration to millions. Please help me to welcome Ms. Manzano to the 2015 Miami Book Fair.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiana and Mariah and Honeyshine, for this wonderful introduction, and then thank you all for coming. So what we'll do this afternoon, I'm going to be in conversation with Ms. Manzano. I will, I'm hoping she will read to us a little bit to begin with, and then I'll ask her some questions, and then you will also get a chance to ask her some questions. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I know you hear this all the time. You taught us all English. Those of us who are not Anglophone already. But and my kids now, we read your books with such wonderful pleasure. So it's wonderful to share the stage with you.
Thank you. So I guess I'll read part of the book that was the most, that was an epiphany for me. And it's, I was raised in a tumultuous childhood, as, you know, it's on all the reviews, which is the life that I described. But there was a moment when a teacher took me to the movies when I was in the 4th grade, and the movie happened to be, it seems so corny and such a cliche, it was West Side Story. And I remember being a rather depressed kid. I used to sleep all the time, and this movie waking me up. So I'll just read a little bit of that moment, because it really was a life-changing event. Folks are chewing popcorn and chattering all around, but when the movie starts, silence falls on the spectators like a blanket from above. The sudden quiet stirs me, and I look up from my lap to the screen. I see the schoolyards, the fences, the buildings, and candy stores I've seen in all my neighborhoods, but here they look different, sharp, clear, bright, and beautiful. What is this that I am watching? There is something different about the familiar indoor scenes as well, but here a guitar leaning against the wall looks romantic. The shadows of holy crosses on the homemade altars are so mysterious, I quickly give religion a second thought. And seeing an actress wearing a cross daintily on her chest nails it for me. I too want to wear a sexy cross between my breasts. The colors I see are hot pink and turquoise and purple, but they are bold and important and meaningful, not just loud. I stare at the screen with some mental distance so I can reason and figure it out, but there is no figuring to do. Because when the actors sing and dance on a roof about being in America, my heart takes over and begins to beat faster and faster until it makes a racket in my ears that roars. My soul, or some power inside me, begins to rise and I panic. Will there be enough room in my body for this new feeling? Make way, make way. A voice inside me shouts. I sit up taller because if I don't accommodate this emotion, it will spill out and explode, maybe even hurting those around me. My eyes open wider so I can see everything better. My ears pick up all the musical sounds flowing and crashing into each other in the air, and I wonder, how long have I been sleeping? My God, how long have I been unconscious and missing everything all around me? Asleep, like a drug person, like Dennis the junkie nodding out on 3rd Avenue. Is Ma right? Am I always daydreaming? Asleep, yes, but daydreaming, no, not really. Daydreams are possibilities. I never daydream anything I think could actually happen. I didn't know what things were possible. So I think that, yes, the performances in that movie were so wonderful, but I think it was seeing the banal objects that I saw every day in my neighborhood, the fire hydrant, the the schoolyard fence, the graffiti, exalted. So it wasn't the guitar leaning against the wall anymore. It was a Rousseau painting. There was a guitar leaning against the wall in every apartment I ever lived in my whole childhood. But I never attributed it with the beauty, obviously, that this movie gave these everyday Puerto Rican icons. And I think that moment made me think that there was something in my life that could be made art. I mean, a guitar leaning against the wall is the same as a French painter doing a vase of flowers, right? But all of a sudden, it had something to do with me, and it was a life-changing moment.
You write about wonderful moments like that are sort of inspirational moments, but there's also some very difficult and sad stories with your father's alcoholism and domestic abuse in your family and other issues. Were you, and the book is written for younger people, were you, was there a moment where you were deciding whether should it be for adults or should it be for younger people?
It started out, to be honest, it started out to be a book for adults, and frankly, nobody wanted to buy it. So, I changed my track, which I'm very good at doing. I've always, si no te sale por una manera, que te salga por la otra, which means if it doesn't work out in one way, you choose another path. It's something my mother always said. And so there was some interest with a YA, and really the difference between an adult novel and a YA is perspective. If you tell the story from a girl's point of view, then it's the point of view of a young person. If I had told the story from the perspective of a woman, then it would have been an adult novel. But even writing for Sesame Street, the topics were not, we never shied away from a topic. You just had to put it in the perspective of the 4-year-old. In the case of a YA, is the perspective of an adolescent, because the book ends when I just get the part on Sesame Street.
Your mom is a very powerful presence in the book, and you talk about her growing up during the Depression and working when you wanted your mom to not work. She was working in a factory, and like my mom worked in a factory, and you wanted her to be like these other mothers who didn't work. And then at some point when you go to college, there were all these other kids who were like, my mom was deprived of her feminism because she wasn't able to work. So how is your mom, like as a figure in your life, and she had a lot of she had a lot to put up with. How has that influenced your life?
Well, she was a great an influence. She had a great sense of humor. But what you're referring to, Edwidge, is sort of like the cultural tightrope that many of us walk, that live in two cultures at the same time. So I'm in school and I'm learning from Dick and Jane books, and Dick's and Jane's mother cooks pancakes and stays home. I mean, every woman stayed home, and their father went to school went to work in a suit, and they lived in a suburban environment. And here my life is totally different. I'm having not pancakes for breakfast, I'm having milky coffee and bread and butter. And my mother's working in a factory all the time, and she's the odd one. So there was always sort of like you're living in two worlds and juggling two existences. But she was always straightforward with me. I remember I asked her once, why didn't she stay home? Because like every kid, I thought she didn't want to. And she said, we never could make ends meet. We couldn't make it on your father's salary if I stayed home. And that was a good answer. And I think it informs my work on Sesame Street. I think kids want a straight answer. They want to be part of the tribe. They want to help what's going on. And she was clear on that. I mean, there was also a time I was watching National Velvet, the movie with Liz Taylor, and she asked why there's war. This is a movie made in the 40s. So, they gave her this jive answer that goes on and on. Nobody understands a word of it, So I asked my mother, why is there war? And she says, war happens when one group of people wants something that another group of people has. Clear, punto, got it.
And in Haitian Creole, we would say, in English Creole, we would say, "Et puis that's it." What?
But you said, let me answer the second part. And then when I went to school and feminism happened, and people were, Betty Friedan and all of those, not that I'm certainly a total supporter of feminism, but here I had been with women who did laundry so long, their nails almost disappeared and worked so hard. So it was hard for me to embrace the feminism of America where people were, women were living in middle-class homes and bemoaning the fact that they didn't have jobs. I mean, you just have to see, it's all a matter of perspective.
And it wasn't always the kind of feminism that was even sympathetic to people who were working in the homes.
Yeah, like pink-collar workers,
Yeah.
people who work in beauty parlors and cleaning ladies and the like. They were not part of that big feminist movement.
In the section that you read, you talk about the importance of West Side Story to you. In one moment, you say, I even thought about reconsidering religion and feeling that as a religious experience. There is a lot of consideration given to religion in your memoir, struggling with religion, attempts at converting your family. So what was the role of religion in your life growing up, and is that something that plays a role in your life now?
It doesn't really play a role in my life now because my mother would, she'd send us to church, but then she wouldn't go. And then she would break, you're not supposed to eat meat on Fridays. So we'd eat meat, and we'd eat hot dogs on Friday. She'd break all the laws, all the ritualistic laws. And then I'd say to her, why you're breaking the law? We're not supposed to eat meat on Friday. Father Fitzgerald, they were all Irish priests. Father Fitzgerald said you're not supposed to. And she would say, I have a special relationship with God. He knows me and I know him, and I don't have to succumb. She didn't use the word succumb. I don't have to do this little stuff that you have to do, but just go to church. So, I mean, that was in a way that she was charming to me and gave me now that you're asking me and I'm speaking of it publicly, it might have been the very beginning of a little independence and not following the Catholic doctrine by rote. And my father, who was, abused her. There was a domestic abuse, reconciliation, and reconciliation was our whole life. The one time I was charmed by him was when we were in church and he didn't genuflect when he was supposed to genuflect. And I said, well, you have to genuflect. It was so odd seeing him in church. It was like, oh my God, is a war gonna break out between the statues and my father because he was so violent? And he said, oh, Jesus Christ, he used to steal chickens. When he was in the world, he used to steal chickens just like the rest of us. I mean, I thought that was so funny and daring of him. So perhaps those two little stories, those two little anecdotes that my parents shared with me made me sort of not be as controlled by Catholic doctrine as many in my culture were.
And I loved when you would ask your mother certain things about like why she would break certain rules, and she said, Jesus understands that I'm a poor working mother.
That's right. That was her answer for everything. I'm a poor working mother. Well, and that Jesus understood that perfectly, and they hadn't, she was cool.
It was the race, this element of race and race relations in the book were really fascinating. You tell the story of how, I would prefer that you tell it, and it'll be interesting to hear from you sort of how that story was interpreted, the story of how everybody started out black and then there was the river.
Oh, yes. So my mother's grandmother told her this story in an explanation of why there are black people. And here's the story told. God made all the people and they were all black because they were from the earth. And then he made a big pool, and all the people had to jump in the pool and come out, and they came out white. But the people at the end of the line, by the time they got to the pool, there was only this much water in the pool. That's why black people have whiter palm of the soles of their feet and palms, because they had to just go like this. And then that's why they're black people. And this was a story told to my mother by her grandmother in, it must have been 1925, Puerto Rico, and these people are making sense of the world without the help of education, and it's, they're living in this colony, and there's Americans running everything, and the Spaniards have run out, and they're very poor, they're desperately poor, but they're still sort of making sense of the world. And I thought that was a wonderful story because it also implied to me, well, does that mean that if you're very dark, you will always be at the end of the line or at the back of the line? There was an impression that stayed with me. So I think there's a poetic sensibility to that.
And you seem to be struggling with that, because also with these, when you talk about the images of sort of these white girls on TV and being brown, and I think that's a message that a lot of young people who read your book will want to interpret. What was that process for you of coming to terms with who you are?
Well, I think that's remarkable that I ended up on Sesame Street, because I love television, and I always loved Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and all of those shows that you could see on TV Land. And I never saw anybody black. There were no black people in 1969 on television. There were certainly no Latin people on television. And I used to wonder how was I going to contribute to a society that didn't see me? Where did I fit? What job was I going to do if I didn't see anybody doing that job? So it's that I came on Sesame Street to provide that recognizable person to kids is wonderful. But there was always a racial ambiguity in my family, because Puerto Ricans have very light-skinned relatives and very dark-skinned relatives. And I remember my cousin Eddie, my beloved cousin Eddie, was very fair. When I used to watch the civil rights stuff on television in the 60s, I used to wonder, I'm going to be in the South with Eddie, and the bus is going to come, and I'm going to have to go to the back, and he's going to have to sit in the front, and will they believe that we're related and that we should sit together? And these are things. And also, there was the whole issue of, my mother would say, don't stay in the sun, because you get darker and darker. Get out of the sun. So I'm wondering, why is that? Why is that bad? And then all Puerto Ricans, we were all white. I mean, you could be as dark as this stage, and the way the adults talked, they were white. And I'll just tell this little story quickly. We used to go to the beach with this family, and she was black, and he was white. They're Puerto Ricans. And, but racially she was black. I used to love this family. They had all these kids, and they had all this food. And we would go to the beach, and she was a big, hefty woman. I went into the water, I got out, and I went up to this big, black, hefty woman, and I said in Spanish, "Give me a towel." I said, "Dame una toalla." The woman turned around and she said, "Child, I don't know what you saying." So all of a sudden, wait a minute, I thought she was Puerto Rican. But she's not Puerto Rican. And it was like a moment of some sort of understanding that kids get, and you file it in the back until you're a little older and can really figure it out.
You mentioned Puerto Rico. What's your relationship to Puerto Rico in the book is very fascinating. Your brother was exiled there because he had asthma when he was a child, and there was sort of this mystery about Puerto Rico. What what was Puerto Rico in your life going on?
Well, I was not, obviously I wasn't born there, but my mother would tell me these horrible, horrible stories of Puerto Rico during the Depression, of children falling in the sewage and dying, and starvation. And so I thought, oh, what a horrible place. I'm so glad you're not there. It's so horrible. And then after they told these terrible stories about it, where there was casual cruelty, she was an orphan and she was given away to people, where you just stayed with people and they fed you if you cleaned, that kind of indentured servant. There were 5 siblings, and it was just the most horrible existence I couldn't possibly imagine. And they would talk about these things, and then they would bring out their guitars and sing beautiful songs about Puerto Rico, about the beautiful breezes and the beautiful Rafael Hernandez songs, and they would just really move me. So I was always confused. Which is it? Is it a horrible place that we never want to go to, or is it this beautiful paradise? And she, and her father was a very cruel man. And then when my brother had asthma, horrible asthma, they sent him to that place. And I thought, how could you send him to this cruel, cruel place, to your cruel, cruel father? She told me all these stories about how cruel she was. Her father was. So that was, I was very ambivalent about Puerto Rico. And to this day, I always go to, Nuyorican have a fantasy about Puerto Rico in our heads, about the little stories we hear. And I'm sure lots of migrant groups or immigrant groups might have this, the children might have the same sensibility. And every time I go to Puerto Rico, it's still not the Puerto Rico of my dreams, the one that I made up.
You mentioned Nuyorican. There was also a moment of real Puerto Rican activism that was at the same time as the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords in New York with their activism. You wrote a young adult book about the revolution of Evelyn Serrano. What did that mean to you? Was that eye-opening? The these young Puerto Rican activists in New York?
It was extremely eye-opening. Imagine it's 1969. Everybody has a platform in America. SDS, women are burning their bras. The war in Vietnam is being protested against, but there's no Latin group really standing up. So I used to kind of side with the Black activist group when I wanted to make a statement. And then a group called the Young Lords in El Barrio Spanish Harlem, who fashioned themselves a little bit after the Black Panthers, took over a church, and they made a big noise. And it was the first time Latins were standing up and saying, look, we are a group. We are a group of people that must be reckoned with. This was the first time in America that had happened. And then they started saying, you have to embrace your culture. And I said, even in my family? With that madness that I lived in? Is that part of being Puerto Rican, embracing this madness, this alcohol, violent? And so and then machismo was part of Puerto Rican culture. I said, do I have to embrace machismo? If I want to be Puerto Rican, do I have to like machismo? And so, it was a struggle there and then I met the great poet, Pedro Juan Pietri, who was a wonderful poet and had a terrific sense of humor, and he could write about the revolution, the Puerto Rican Revolution, and that sensibility with humor, and I embraced it better.
So then you went to the School of Performing Arts, and at some point your parents, after separating, getting back together, got divorced, and Sesame Street. The book ends, without being a spoiler alert, on after your audition for Sesame Street. You don't tell us what happens. So first, before we open up to the audience, can you tell us a little bit about that experience of coming on Sesame Street, and then will there be a sequel?
Well, first let me tell you, getting to performing arts, which was the Fame School, you know, they made a movie and it was a TV show and everything. I had like a great grades in the South Bronx. All you had to do was show up and you'd get A's. Well, when I got to performing arts, this middle class school of kids who had been to better elementary schools, my grades plummeted. I didn't know what a noun was. I didn't know how to write an essay. None of these things were taught to me in the school in the Bronx. So I was treading water. It was like being in a different world with all of these middle-class kids. And that's how but I ended up going to college on an audition. I mean, that's why the acting thing happened. I always loved theater, but there was no way I could get to college with those grades. I was like really smart in the Bronx and really dumb in Manhattan, apparently. So I had to audition to get into a school, and that's how I got into the acting school. And then we did Godspell, which was a off-Broadway, then a Broadway success, right from school. And Sesame Street was my first audition. And as I said, because the 60s were so, everybody had a platform. Sesame Street was geared towards the African-American underserved child. We were going to eliminate racism and close the education gap, was the mission of the show. But then all of these Chicanos on the West Coast said, wait a minute, you have role models for African-American children. We demand Latinos on the show as well. And that's how Emilio Delgado and I got cast on Sesame Street. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Was it okay?
Will you be writing a follow-up to?
I think I'd love to. I think I will. I think it'll be an adult book, because I think that then it will be from the point of view of a woman, you know, and I don't think that a young person would be that interested in that.
That's true, and the parents might not let their kids read
Right.
your
Right.
amorous adventures.
Right, my love life with Oscar the Grouch.
Well, thank you. I now we're going to open it up to the audience. Usually we have trouble getting one first question, but
Okay. I'm so happy to be here and hear, because you just meant so much to me growing up. I can't hear you.
I don't think the mic is.
Maybe
Can you
is there
turn it on, maybe?
Is there a click?
Use this.
Here he is.
I was at a, oh, thank you. Okay. I was at some academic event like 10 years ago, and this professor took a semester off and wrote a book all about an image from the Little Rock Nine of the solo girl who didn't get the message that crowds were going to be there, and she went to school and the crowds were screaming at her, and this professor was like, this is the image that defines like whatever this generation in terms of race. And I got up and I was like, no, you know, okay, I'm from suburban Boston, and I guess Sesame Street came on in '69.
Yeah,
That's the year I was born. And they started, I guess, busing black students to my suburban town, because it's unlike Miami-Dade, you know, Boston is like Boston, and then every town has their own school district. So to, you know, achieve integration, not only, you know, in the city of Boston, which had its own issues, but outside of Boston, they started this program to bus kids out for opportunity, but also to get races to mingle. So my town was like mostly white, like one other, and I just feel that, you know, Sesame Street from my generation had, you know, really made racial overtures. Like, of course, the mission now that you're saying it's clear, but so I want to thank you for, you know, reaching out to.
Thank you. That was the absolute mission of the show. It came out of the 60s, and America was idealistic, the exact opposite as it is now. It was, even President Johnson was going to create a great society. There was Head Start was the beginning of that. So yes, it was a representation of the times we lived in.
Okay. I don't know if it was a question. Okay, I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
For,
Thank
like,
you for
you made
saying.
overtures there.
Thank you.
Whereas, you know, in different places, people were trying as well.
Thank you.
I don't really reframe. I tell the story, I think, to what the story is, and I anticipate. I think the part that you can control. I mean, the adult books. I assume my children will read when they're ready, and not totally bored with just hearing me speak, much less wanting to read me. So we've read the young books. So, but I think it's Sonia said this earlier, that the difference between an adult book and a children's book is a perspective, and often, if you're writing a book from the point of view of a 16-year-old girl, it's very different than from a 46-year-old woman. So that's really more the individual than the way in which you tell the story. And if it's first person and you're speaking like a 16-year-old girl, you won't sound the same way as another one. But it's you try not to talk down to, and I think that's one of the things that's wonderful about your memoir, is that it doesn't talk down to young people. It's it talks to them on the same level. You try to write it as though you would write to anybody else, but if it's a fictional voice, then you have to be true to what a 16-year-old would sound like. It's more the character than the audience that you're focusing on. I think.
I think we have to be careful of trying to overprotect kids so much. Like, I was talking to a woman about Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes, which was a great influential book to me, because it was so funny, and they had such how could misery be so presented with such humor and such profundity? And she said, it was too sad for me to let my kid read it. But there was so much life and joy and overcoming things. They would be ashamed not to. Certainly, you're not going to read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich to a kid, or Auschwitz. But The Diary of Anne Frank is a story of a girl in a horrible situation that certainly should be read.
I just want to really give credit to the Miami Book Fair. I don't know who put this synergy together, but it's amazing, because my mom, I'm Haitian, I was born in Harlem, first generation, and my mom used to make me watch Sesame Street as a kid, and she didn't just do it for me, but she did it for herself, because she needed to learn English. And as a kid growing up in the 80s, it was terribly embarrassing when she used to come to the school, and when she was angry at me, she would say, "I'm hungry at you, I'm hungry, I'm hungry." And I used to be so embarrassed, because all the kids would make fun of me, because they would say, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry," when she would say, "I'm angry." So I just want to say it's such an honor to be here with both of you, because I have my daughter here, who's 14, and I would make her watch Sesame Street. So I don't really have a question.
Thank you.
It's just a statement. So thank you so much.
Thank you. La belle vie.
I have a question for Doña Sonia. You told us what the goals were, the ideals of those of you who started Sesame Street. And after all of these decades, how have your goals been achieved? What has not, and what has surprised you about the impact of the show?
Well, what surprises me now is the race relations in America now. If you had told me this, what was happening now was in 1969, I wouldn't have believed it. I mean, it seems like have made no strides, but we have on different levels. Obviously, what this woman just said, that we've impacted the lives of many, is absolutely true. We did not close the education gap as we thought. So we didn't achieve all of those things, but certainly we presented an ideal environment and an ideal community which showed the wish of America and the hope of America. And I think that's saying a lot.
Someone from the cast should run for president instead of Donald Trump.
Oh.
So I want to provide just a little context. I just have a comment, really. I'm Michael Bolden. I'm the editorial director for Knight Foundation. We're sponsors of Miami Book Fair. And I spent 14 years as an editor at the Washington Post. Thank both of you for being here, but I say that preface to say this. I started reading at 3 years old. before my mother was aware that I could read. And she always traced it back to the time I spent at Sesame Street. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
That answers the last gentleman's question in a way, right?
That's exactly right.
From Sesame Street to the Washington Post.
I too wanted to, thank you for influencing a generation. I too was Hispanic and raised Puerto Rican family from the Bronx as well. Because one for favorite. And it's true that you are a cultural icon for us. I mean, I too used to get together with my family to see West Side Story once a year because that's the only time we got to see someone Hispanic that wasn't, a junkie or, some kind of con artist or, whatever it was. And it was great to see that. I do have more faith, I guess, in what's going on in America. And I do see a lot more strides. And yes, there are moments that are, but with that, Sesame Street hit so many touchstone moments in just a generation. I mean, I still remember many of the series. I mean, I still get misty-eyed when I think of Mr. Hooper dying. Were there moments like that? Was there a particular episode that really, really touched the heartstrings for you?
Well, I was very proud to be part of the show when Mr. Hooper died, and we did death on the show, the first show to do a show on death for children. The producer had to fight the authorities, the front office, the suits who said, no, this is a kid's show, we're not gonna do death, and she prevailed. It's become a touchstone episode, beautifully written. And of course, my marriage and my having a baby on Sesame Street, we were like the first reality show, without the whining. But the point was to show, a Latin family. We had the same hopes and dreams of it as anyone else, to have a baby, to have a good school, to, go on vacation once a year without being the butt of the joke, which was a lot of 70s television. When they started letting a lot of Latins and blacks onto the screen, you always waited for the taco joke when the Latin actor came on, because that was the reason he or she was there. And we were, Maria had problems of daycare and fixing that toaster for 40 years and, just like everybody else.
Do you see, if you were, I know you've sadly retired from Sesame, do you see, if you're advising them, things that they could do in terms, like, for sexuality, like transgender children and of that nature? Is there room in all that for those children, for that conversation?
That's an interesting question, because this sexuality and transgender seems to be really on the radar in America now. And I was just reading, I read the book George, and and it was a terrific book, and I realized that transgender was not necessarily sexual. This is, children feel this before puberty. So it wasn't like I want to date a girl or I want to date a boy. It had nothing to do with it. It was just like, so that you can say that does have something to do with children. I don't know. Sesame Street is asked to take on every cause. AIDS, which they did in South Africa. Divorce they didn't do. They tried, but that failed. And I'm not on the show anymore, but it's certainly, and they're doing autism now is an initiative that they've taken on. I don't know if they'll do transgender. I don't know if the preschool audience can get that.
I just wanted to say that, I used to love Sesame Street when I was little. My mom would know exactly what was coming on, and she'd just turn it on for me, and I would watch it. And straight from beginning to end, it always touched my mind and made me learn and helped me learn. It's really inspiring. You're very inspiring.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask you, how long did it take you to write the book, though? The book? It's a great book.
Thank you. On and off, I think like 5 years. I have drafts that are, I did write it in the voice of a woman before. I wrote it going all through Sesame Street before. I wrote it up to, so many drafts. I want to say about 5 years. I put it down and then go back to it.
And how's your daughter Gabby? And
She's great. And Luis is still on Sesame Street. I don't know how they're going to explain my departure, but there you are.
Hey, does this sound familiar? Go in on the left is the name of the song. Come out on the right, and you'll never.
Absolutely.
That was you and David when he was a waiter, and you were teaching.
That's right.
In and out.
Right. A very funny bit.
So I think 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that just like some other people that said, maybe a comment. When I came to this country, I didn't speak English. Well, I always said tenchu. Someone would say, "What's your name?" And I said, "Tenchu. Are you hungry? Tenchu." So it was through Sesame Street that I learned that I was supposed to say thank you. So, but I want to know, how do you feel as you sit here and to receive all of these great comments from people who tell you that Sesame Street actually met its goal? How does that feel to you?
Well, it feels terrific. When I was a kid, I found comfort watching television, and it's wonderful that I grew up and was on a television show that I hope provided comfort for people and children in tumultuous relationships in situations as I have.
Our
we
last
have
question.
room. Sorry. We have room for one more question, and we need to get ready for the other authors. Just go ahead.
As everyone else has said, I want to thank you because as we write up international books, I read really early because of Sesame Street. I was reading at 3 years old because of my mom, who would make me write everything that I saw, and knowing my letters from Sesame Street and stuff like that. So thank you, and I put my children in front of Sesame Street, and my 16-year-old is probably the smartest person I've ever met, and because she had an early education from Sesame Street. So thank you.
Very good.
I also want to say to Danticat that because of Sesame Street, I love to read. And when I went back to college, I had two of my children first. And I went back to college at 27-ish. And I was a major for marketing. And someone said, well, you have to take an intro to literature class, so why don't you take this class? And I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. But I took it because I love to read. I was like, okay, I can read, and it'll help me, get back into the course of school. And I read Crit Crack. And I changed my major to literature. And I teach it now. I'm a professor here in Miami Dade. So I not only got my bachelor's degree, but I got my master's degree, and I teach here in Miami. I have 2 classes. I teach Crit Crack every time I get to the class. And it impacts so many of my other students too. And it's my favorite. And I want to thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Okay, just make a right outside for autographing books, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, really? Yeah. Great.